Welcome back to the show, week 17, and it is a bit of a bittersweet week for the show, for me personally. As I teased last week on the program, it is likely, barring some weird turn of fate or twist of fate, that this will be the last edition of this show filmed in this particular studio. Now, that does not mean that the show will not go on, although I might have to take a week off. But it is somewhat bittersweet because so far every single one of them has been shot here, and moving on is difficult, as I'm sure you've experienced in your own life. Now, as I just implied, I don't know if there will be a show next week. We are going to be moving into our new studio, the entire TYT network. I find the idea that it will be ready and be capable of filming stuff by next weekend almost impossible to conceive of. And so it is likely that for the first time in over 4 months, I will have to take a week off. Now, if that is the case, then it's likely that I will shoot vlogs or something like that, respond to the news in a much more informal context. And so if that happens, expect that there might not be the fancy graphics and overlays and stuff like that. I might not be able to continue that for the week, but hopefully there will be no problems and we will be back on schedule after maybe a gap of 1 week. We'll see. But there has been stuff in the news, covered a lot of the biggest stories like Syria and stuff like that on the Young Turks just yesterday. But there were a number of different interesting stories that we unfortunately were not able to get to on the periphery of politics and society that I thought were super interesting. Some media news, we're going to talk about that. But we're going to be starting off with the NSA. So it turns out that NSA analysts have been spying in on their loved ones, on their love interests, people that they want to hook up with, relationships, and investigating people. Is anyone surprised by this? Now, this comes after about 2 weeks of the NSA releasing a statement, yeah, so we spied in, we accidentally collected data on Americans 3,000 times just last year. There have been some intentional, overzealous NSA analysts in the past, but now specifically when it comes to spying in on love interests, everything that we expected to be true turns out to be true. In fact, they even have a term for it at the NSA, LOVEINT, which is kind of cute, I suppose. Now this falls with their normal naming scheme of things like SIGINT for signals intelligence, HUMINT for human intelligence. That, I guess, is a relic of the Cold War. I guess we don't do that anymore. We just spy in through digital means. But yeah, so this is what we've been predicting all along. Ever since Edward Snowden released his first few revelations, we knew that this is where it would go to. Now, what they're saying is that there have only been a few cases of this that they've been able to find, which implies to me one of two things. Either they are lying about that, or they are doing absolutely nothing to investigate the chance that this is going on. Because think about, put yourself, I'm sure that you see yourself as a moral, ethical person. Put yourself in the position of an NSA analyst who has the ability to tap into cell phone calls, email information, browsing habits, Snapchats, Twitter history, things like that. Would you be able to resist the urge to find out a little bit of information about somebody that you're interested in romantically or sexually? I consider myself to be an ethical person, but that sort of information is just too appealing as humans. And can we really expect that NSA officers are more ethical, more moral than the average American? Probably not. They're probably run-of-the-mill, the same as anyone else. And that means that they will fall to this temptation. And we know from what Edward Snowden has released that many, possibly millions of government agents and contractors working for the government have access to this information. So the idea that a few people have done it, that's insane. No, thousands, possibly millions have done it, have looked in on people they were personally interested in, have looked in on celebrities they were interested in. This should be the least surprising thing in the world. And honestly, I'm kind of glad that this came out, even though it's horrible for those people that were spied in on, because it seems like over the past few months, simply finding out that the government is spying on you is not enough to convince Americans that this is wrong, that this needs to stop. There should be much more opposition to it than there has been. Perhaps when it comes down to NSA agents and possibly other government contractors looking in on people that they're sexually interested in, maybe that will clue people in that something needs to be done. Because it's very easy, unfortunately, for most Americans to say, well, I'm not doing any kind of spying, I'm not acting out against the government, I'm not committing any crimes, and so I have nothing to fear. But you don't need to be doing any of that stuff to have something to fear. In fact, it can simply be that someone's interested in stalking you. And perhaps that will scare people into some sort of activism against this. That's my hope. Now, there are far better reasons, I think, to oppose the NSA's violations of our privacy. But if that's what gets people caring about it, if LOVEINT is what changes the polls, I'd be more than happy about that. Is it likely that that's going to change things? Perhaps not. But our predictions did come true. They have been looking in on people, trying to find naked pictures of them, trying to find conversations they had with people, and finding out stuff about them. It's only the most expected thing in the world. And I expect that more information on this will come out in the future. But let's move on. The Cato Institute has released a report saying that the poor have it too damn good in America. It is simply too easy to live off the government dole and live it up as a poor American. And so, obviously, this is ridiculous if you're an American and not working for the Cato Institute. And so we're going to reply to that. But first, I want to talk about the study that they conducted, Michael Tanner and Charles Hughes, and then we'll respond to it. So what they did was, they calculated the maximum benefits of every federal anti-poverty program in which a single parent with 2 kids could participate, including things like tax credits for the working poor, and supplemental nutrition, and health benefits for pregnant women and young children, calling it all welfare. Now, many of these programs are not welfare, but they know that people don't like welfare. Even if they like the program, when you call it welfare, they don't like it, and so they imply that it's all welfare. And they also imply, by the way, that this individual could get all of these benefits simultaneously, when we know that even people who are eligible for various unemployment benefits, SNAP, EBT, all of these programs, these welfare programs, or programs, maybe I'm playing into their terminology, often don't collect them. But they're saying that they would. And they say, well, look at this. You're making more than minimum wage if you were to get all of these benefits simultaneously, which, by the way, you can't have all of them forever. Many of them have time limits on how long you can collect them. And they say, well, look, you're getting more than minimum wage, so you have it easy. Why would you work? That's a good point. But I draw a different conclusion from it than they would. They say, if you can make more than minimum wage by collecting all of these welfare benefits, then why would you want to work? I say, obviously, welfare is not enough. Minimum wage is not enough. Neither of them is good. It doesn't matter which one is $1 more per hour than the other. It's simply not enough. And here's some data to back that up. Only 2 of the 33 countries in the OECD devote a smaller share of their economic output to programs that help poor families make ends meet than the US, Mexico, and South Korea. So look, they can say, look at all this information, like we're giving them so much money. Well, no, 31 out of 33 of the OECD countries do more for the poorest people in their country. And by the way, it's easy to say you can make a couple of dollars per hour more, something like possibly $15 per hour if you were collecting all of them for the short period of time that you can get them. But that's not enough to live in most states in the country. In fact, the cheapest state to live in per country, they're going by MIT's living wage calculator, is $20.14 per hour to cover a family's basic necessities. Now, this isn't for an individual. This is for someone with those 2 kids that we're talking about. That's South Dakota. Did you notice that that does not actually reach even South Dakota's living wage requirement, this $15 per hour that requires that you tweak every number in a way that makes their argument the most possible? You still can't live in South Dakota. And by the way, all of the other states are more expensive to live in. Which implies 2 things. One, that even under the Cato Institute's stupid idea of how much someone with 2 kids can collect, which they would not in reality be able to collect, you can't live. And also, by the way, along the way, they've made the argument that the minimum wage is not high enough. Because even if you are working at a minimum wage job, you're working 40 or more hours per week, you cannot sustain a family even in the poorest and easiest to live in states in the country. Now, there are, of course, other problems, as I've implied. You can look at the study if you want. It's pretty extensive. And to be fair, to the Cato Institute's credit, they do give some of these caveats later on in their study. But the problem is that the conservative outlets who are going to play up and report on this study, as many already have, are not going to include those caveats. What they're going to say is, look, someone on welfare with 2 kids can make more than someone who's making minimum wage, and so clearly it's an injustice. They won't include any of the caveats that we've talked about. They won't include the fact that that most people do not get all of the benefits that they deserve, that they cannot stay on it for as long as they would need to. They simply say, look, the poor have it too easy, and that ultimately is the biggest problem with this study. It's not that they get the methodology wrong, it's that their motivation for conducting it is to demonize the poor, to tell people, look, the poor are lazy, they have no incentive to work, and they're living better than you do, and you're working. So shouldn't you hate them? That's the entire purpose, and that's what's so horrible about this. Even if you were to collect all of these things, you would not be able to live with 2 children. And as we pointed out, we're doing far less for the poorest people in our country than many other comparable Western countries around the world. And so the Cato Institute, this is absolutely horrible. I think that we're doing far too much to demonize the poor in America and not enough to help them get on their feet and start working again. And I think that once you look at the caveats, they really cut themselves off at the knees. Anyway, sort of the problem when they've put so much money over the past few decades into these think tanks, into producing fake PhDs. They get doctorates at BS universities so that they can conduct research like this and put a veneer of science over their bullshit ideology. And the problem is that then both conservative outlets and more mainstream outlets that don't have enough time to read the entire studies, they talk about these and they reach the wrong conclusions because they don't understand the manipulation of the data that went into it. But whatever, let's talk about another study. I actually think this one is pretty interesting, although it paints both the left and the right in a pretty negative light. New research by Political Research Quarterly is showing that both mainstream news outlets on the right and the left might be harming the political discourse in America. Perhaps this is not, based on that headline, the most surprising thing in the world, but there are some interesting findings here, and so we're going to talk about them. So what they did was they looked at the 2008 presidential election, they looked at Fox News and MSNBC, and what effect watching those channels had on people's perception of the candidates. Now, initially, these results might not be surprising. They found that people who watched Fox News became more favorable of McCain and less favorable of Obama over the course of the presidential election, although again, perhaps not a causal mechanism operating right there. And conversely, people with who watched MSNBC also liked McCain less, liked Obama more. But what's interesting about this is that they didn't change their views about their own candidate and the opposition candidate in the same way. It's not like they were becoming educated about both of them. It tended to be almost all attacking the opposition candidate. And so Fox News didn't tend to do that much to prop up McCain, or the effect that they had on people wasn't based on that. It was mainly attacking Obama, and the opposite was true for MSNBC. They spent a lot of time attacking McCain, according to what we're seeing here, and not so much actually defending or supporting Obama, which I think actually is pretty surprising. Another thing that does not surprise me, but I'm very glad that it's coming out in this research, is that at least when it comes to Fox and to a lesser extent MSNBC, their opinion programs tended to have the strongest effect, but their news programs had the same sort of effect, although to a lesser degree. So it didn't matter if you were watching Glenn Beck or Bill O'Reilly or their news programs, they were doing the same sort of thing. They were propping up the candidate that supports their ideology, and they were attacking the candidate on the other side. I personally am not surprised by this, but I am very glad that it's being detailed here. Now, to sum up what the study found, Smith and Searles, they're the authors that wrote it, they say, the study suggests that viewers' attitudes are shaped predominantly by vitriolic coverage of the opposition. Rather than viewers consuming news from a source that confirms their support for their in-party candidate, viewers are consuming news from a source that seems to confirm their distaste for the opposition. The result is not only more polarized partisans, but also partisans who are polarized because they hate the other side, rather than because they are card-carrying supporters of their side. And that is interesting. And so, of course, reading this research, I have to think about what sort of network TYT is, because that's where I work. And I think that we do certainly do quite a bit of attacking the opposite side. And it certainly is not true that we mindlessly boost our own side. We attack Obama when necessary. But I would say the difference, I think, between us and MSNBC on the left and Fox on the right is we are very focused on providing context to the stories that we talk about. And I, especially in my own program, are trying to do that. It's not simply about demonizing them and then case closed. It's about showing why they're wrong, saying what they're wrong about, why it affects society in the way we think it does, what damage is it doing to the country, to democracy, things like that. It's that context that makes us different from these other programs. And I think all too often MSNBC is willing to just say, haha, Mitt Romney said something stupid, and Fox is willing to just say, haha, Obama's a Marxist Kenyan. And then that's as far as they go. You don't really learn anything through that. But with programs like mine, with programs like programs on TYT, it's, yeah, we'll do some of that as well because it's fun and blah, blah, blah. But we provide the necessary context. And I think that that's the benefit of watching a program like ours. Maybe I'm tooting our own horn, but that's why I like what we do. And so very interesting research coming out here. I like what it says about the lack of distinction really between opinion programs and news programs on these networks, and also the difference between supporting your candidate and opposing the opposition candidate. It's definitely something to think about as we move into the next presidential cycle. Okay, so enough of the studies. We're going to turn to some more local news from around the country. We got a couple stories like that. In the wake of Sandy Hook, one thing that gun supporters want to do to protect kids at schools is to arm the staff. Now, this is something that the NRA was boosting right after Sandy Hook, and it's something that many schools tried to do in the ensuing months. Now, in Arkansas particularly, they said, look, the public schools, you can't do this. These people are not trained. We have laws already about what it takes to be a security guard. You can't simply say teachers have guns. That's not good. We can't do that. But private schools are a different matter, legally, at least in Arkansas. And so here we've got the Arkansas Christian Academy. They're saying, we're not a public school. We're not constrained legally in the same ways that public schools are. And so we are going to arm our teachers. And so take a look at this sign. This is now a post outside of the Arkansas Christian Academy in Bryant, Arkansas. You see, staff is armed and trained. Any attempt to harm children will be met with deadly force. And he looks to be looking through, I suppose that could be just an assault rifle. It actually looks to me like he's looking through a sniper rifle. I don't know why they would arm their teachers with sniper rifles, but maybe that's the only clip art they had available. Now, Pastor Perry Black is a school administrator at this school. He says, I just felt like with what's going on in many of the public sectors where there seems to be a lot of shootings, we need to take the same stance that we do in church on Sunday for our kids Monday through Friday. And so what he's referring to there is that at the churches in that area, they do apparently use armed security guards. Now, I don't know how many churches have been getting shot up. I don't know if it's necessary that you have armed security guards at the church. But he is saying that, look, that's worked. We haven't been shot up, so clearly it's working. And so let's extend it to the schools. Now, look, before I criticize this, I do want to say I understand that their objective here, I hope, is just to protect the children and not just to display how pro-gun they are and all that. And I respect that. I want the kids to be safe too. I just think that there are some very real downsides and consequences to arming the teachers. And so let's talk about some of them. One is, and we cover stories like this constantly, there are responsible gun owners operating this policy. That's what they're going to say. They've had the training, they're certified, they know how to use guns, and yet every single day around America we see the stories of certified firearms teachers shooting students. We see people who own guns, have owned guns for a long time, cleaning their gun and shooting their kid. We see them knowing how to store their guns, and yet accidentally one of their kids gets access to their gun and shoots another kid. I mean, this stuff happens every single day. And so honestly, I know that the retort is going to be, we are responsible, we're trained. You're also human, and accidents happen. And when you have a school full of children, I don't want accidents to happen. I don't want one of these teachers to accidentally leave their gun in their desk and not lock it, or leave it in their car and somebody breaks in. I mean, that sort of thing does happen. This is Earth. We're humans. Accidents happen. And also, by the way, now that people will know that there are guns there, hopefully they're keeping them on their person. But if not, it's a great place now to go to steal some guns, if that's what you're interested in doing, since you know that they're going to be available there. And as a final point, this is something that Cenk was talking about in our production meeting yesterday. The idea of arming the teachers is to tell potential school shooters, don't come here because we can defend ourselves. And that seems reasonable on its face. But understand that most school shooters are not going to the school to shoot up a bunch of people easily and then walk away and go about their daily lives. No, you know what happened at Columbine. You know what happened at all these school shootings over the last few years. They go there to kill people, yes, but they also go there to die. And if they know that teachers are going to have guns there, it seems like a great way to accomplish that mission. You go in, maybe you kill a few kids, and then a teacher guns you down. You go out in the blaze of glory that you were hoping for. And so I think that perversely, arming the teachers might actually accomplish the opposite goal of what the Arkansas Christian Academy has in mind. It might actually draw in more shooters. I hope not, but that could be the case. So anyway, let me know what you think about this. If it's a good idea to arm private school teachers and staff, will that actually make the school more safe in the long run? Okay. As much as I don't want to talk about birthers and that sort of thing, we've got a couple of funny stories, so I am going to cover them. Hopefully they won't come up all that often. Somebody commented, by the way, on the last full episode that I'm Marco Rubioing by drinking constantly. But I would like to point out that I don't drink in the middle of stories. I drink between stories, so I'm not Marco Rubio in that regard. I stop talking for a second and then drink. I don't like hurriedly do it. And also, it's like really humid in this room. If I don't drink, I find that like my throat just gets like destroyed by the end of a full program. And so I do try to do that. Okay, so let's move on to this. Ted Cruz was talking at the National Instruments Corporation in Austin, Texas, and at one point he wanted to shepherd out the media, get rid of them, and so he decided to tell a little joke at that point. He says that as the press was ushered out of the room at the beginning of the event, Cruz said, "I promise that while y'all are out, I'll try not to give any like really juicy piece of crazy news." And then he added, "I am secretly a citizen of Ethiopia." I'm secretly black. Isn't that funny? No, that's not funny. Why didn't he say Peru or France or Russia or something like that? He could have chosen any country. He has to choose one of the most, at least in America, one of the most recognizable African states. Yeah, it's really funny that you could be secretly black. And the reason that it's so horrible is not just the sort of racial undertones to it or even overtones. It's the way that it references the double standard that is obviously in play in terms of how people view his eligibility to be a presidential candidate and how they viewed Obama's. Now, we understand on the left that it was entirely racially based, the opposition to Obama. I mean, the fact that nobody had a problem with John McCain when he wasn't born in America, the fact that they don't have a problem with Ted Cruz, which we're going to talk about in a future story, it's racially based, and so it is so irresponsible to joke about it, to say it's perfectly fine to oppose somebody if they were from Ethiopia. Whew, thank God I'm from Canada, so that's not the case. Look, the reason I'm bringing this up is not because I don't think he should be able to run for president. I honestly don't care where someone was born. If they're an American, which Ted Cruz is, which Obama is, I think they should be able to run for president. And so even if he is born in Canada, which he is, we've seen his birth certificate, I don't really care. I think that the definition of naturalized citizen is kind of vague and you can define it in different ways. So that doesn't really bother me. But I don't like the joking, playing up to the birther crowd when you yourself should be opposed by them in the same way that they opposed Obama. I think that that's pretty irresponsible. It's not the worst thing Ted Cruz has done recently, but I oppose it. Now, to carry on with the whole Ted Cruz issue, we've got awesome hypocrisy on the part of the Tea Party. So the Tea Party is still holding rallies, and of course the whole Ted Cruz situation is going to come up because birthers, Tea Parties, that goes together like peanut butter and chocolate. And so somebody had to bring it up, and we've got a video of, I believe Raw Story took this, of a woman at a Tea Party rally being asked about the whole Ted Cruz, should he be able to run the issue. Here's what she said.
As far as I'm concerned, Canada's not really foreign soil. Yeah, that's the way I look at it.
Once again, like with the Ted Cruz video that we talked about this week, she just laughs. It's hardly foreign soil. Have you seen how white people are up there? And again, I go right to race, and so people are going to attack me, but that's what it's about. That's why she reacted the way she did. That's why Ted Cruz made the joke about being a citizen of Ethiopia. It's because they understand the racial underpinnings of their own arguments, their own opposition to certain people. They didn't dislike Barack Obama because, well, he might be from Kenya, and that's just not constitutional, the same as if he was from Germany. No, it's because he's black. And Ted Cruz looks white, and so they're fine with him. Now, she can joke and say, oh, Canada, ha ha ha. And what I love about that, by the way, is that many of these Tea Partiers hate Canada. They hate how socialist they are and how they have socialized medicine. And for the most part, they say, well, you know, these liberals, they can just run to Canada if they want to. But when it comes to Ted Cruz, suddenly Canada, longtime ally of ours, wonderful white people, I mean, wonderful country to the north of us, it's totally fine if he's from there. Now, they had video, by the way, from Raw Story talking to other people, and obviously, as we expected, the birthers are not going to have a problem with Ted Cruz. Now, like I've said before, I think that it's perfectly fine for him to run, but going by their own logic, their own argument that they've crafted in the run-up to the last presidential election, actually 2 presidential elections, and that they continue with to this day, they should be opposed to Ted Cruz for the same reason. And they won't be, because at the end of the day, it has absolutely nothing to do with photoshopped birth certificates and just wanting to see the paperwork and blah, blah, blah. It has to do with race. Obama looks black, Ted Cruz looks white. Doesn't really matter if they are fully one or the other. The simple appearance is enough to make them uncomfortable with one and totally fine with the other. It's total freaking bullshit, total hypocrisy. And I hope that, as much as I don't want to talk about the birther issue, I hope that this gets thrown in their face over and over and over as this next presidential election comes. Orly Tights, whoever, all of the birthers, you need to bring this up every time. Why aren't you opposed to Ted Cruz? I think that that would be delicious. Now, those are the 2 birther issues. We're going to move on to 2 issues of same-sex marriage. A Republican is running for Congress in Alabama. His name is Dean Young, and he has a particular social issue that he's running his campaign based on. And not just his campaign. He thinks that everybody running for that issue should run based on the same issue. Is it dealing with the economic issue in the country? Is it Syria, perhaps? No, of course. It's gay marriage. And he's got some wonderful quotes in regard to it. So let's get to these. First of all, he says, "I'm against homosexuals pretending like they're married. If you want to have homosexuals pretending like they're married, then go to the Democrat Party." I love that he has to say Democrat Party. It's the Democratic Party. Okay, you're not a child. Act like an adult. It's the Democratic Party. Stop listening to Rush Limbaugh. But again, homosexuals pretending like they're married. I'm sorry, dude. It's legal in a lot of states now. They're not pretending. They are legally, constitutionally protected. And thankfully, the Supreme Court, which has been a mess in the last half decade or so, did make the right call in some ways when it comes to same-sex marriage earlier this year. And so, according to the Supreme Court, these people are actually married. You're going to have to get used to it. But he goes on. His main problem is that the Republicans have just been too easygoing when it comes to the issue of same-sex marriage, that they need to oppose it more. By the way, these are the people that, after DOMA, they're still fighting constitutional amendments every single year to outlaw same-sex marriage. In states across the country, they have passed constitutional amendments in many states to ban same-sex marriage. But according to Dean Young, they're not strong enough. And so he says, Congress is weak and spineless. We get these mealy-mouthed politicians that just want to move up the ladder, and they won't tell people where they stand. No, they have been telling people where they stand, and where they stand is an awful place. I like to call the 1920s. They're living in a different era, and they're more than willing to talk about it. Both the radio hosts and the Republican politicians have been very, very willing to say where they stand on this. And that's why, by the way, Dean Young, it's so freaking surprising when a Democratic senator or representative is willing to come out in support of gay marriage. Because it happens very, very, very rarely. I can think of like 2. Portman, I think Murkowski. That's pretty much it. Okay, Dean Young. So, by the way, he goes on because, like I said, it's not just him that's against gay marriage. He thinks that every candidate should be, and so he's got this pledge that he wants people to sign. It's the pledge against same-sex marriage. There's a number of stipulations, and this is what they are. 1, I believe that only marriage is between one man and one woman. As a member of Congress, I shall take active steps to oppose gay marriage. I support the bylaw change to expel any member of the Republican Executive Committee who opposes the party position by supporting gay marriage. What I love about that, by the way, I don't have time to do the full story. There's a young Republican activist who is in favor of same-sex marriage because she was not born in the 30s. And they tried to expel her from the party, and she fought against them, and so she is not going to be expelled from the party, which I love. And so Dean Young obviously hates that. And look at this. He's saying you can't even run as a Republican. That's what he wants if you're in favor of same-sex marriage. Screw the Republican voters. You don't get to choose what type of Republican you get to elect. We're going to choose before the election even happens. And so I love the combination of the homophobia and the anti-democratic attitudes there. And like the idea, honestly, at this point that the Republicans are too weak when it comes to opposing same-sex marriage, that is ridiculous. And look, I'm sorry. You're losing ground, buddy, Dean Young. Maybe if this was the 90s, maybe if this was the early 2000s, you could run and win solely on opposing same-sex marriage. But the country is moving on. The people who have a vested interest in stopping same-sex marriage are dying every single day. They're just old people. Younger people don't care about that type of bullshit. And so I don't know if Dean Young is going to win. he's a Republican congressman, so it doesn't really matter which one it is. They're cogs in a massive political machine anyway, but I think this is a pretty stupid way to run your campaign. Now let's move on, because some people are being more creative when it comes to this issue. If you're a conservative and you oppose same-sex marriage, simply saying it's against traditional marriage, it's against sacred traditions and all that stuff, that's so 90s. Nobody's being swayed or persuaded by that anymore. And so they are having to become more creative. And one group that is coming up with more creative arguments for stopping same-sex marriage is the Council for Marriage Policy. They've released this report. It's written by their president, David R. Usher. It's called Our Last Chance to Save Traditional Marriage. And they have come up with the most twisted, logic-bending argument for why you shouldn't allow same-sex marriage. And it's that it will lead to lesbians enslaving men. Now, I think there's actually a series of porn movies with that title, but his idea here is that the lesbians would economically slave men, and that's scary. And so we're going to go through his twisted argument. By the way, this column is 37 paragraphs long, and so you'll have to forgive me for not reading the entire thing. That sounds ridiculous, but here are some sections of it. First of all, the Supreme Court, if there's same-sex marriage, will have to have multiple classes of marriage. That's what he's saying. Class 1 will be mother-mother marriages. When two women marry, it is a three-way contract among two women and the government. Most women will bear children by men outside the marriage, often by pretending they are using birth control when they are not. So the idea is that rather than simply getting like a sperm donation or something like that, no, they're going to lie to a guy, have sex with a guy, pretend that they're on birth control, get impregnated, and then you can follow his logic from there. He says, entrapped men become economically conscripted third parties to these marriages, but get nothing in return. Well, except for the sex, I suppose. But that apparently isn't worth much to him, although most straight guys would seem to love sleeping with a lesbian. But that isn't convincing to David R. Usher. But moving on, he says that these women would be able to combine incomes, double up on tax-free child support and welfare benefits, decrease costs, and double the human resources available to raise children and run their household. And so basically they would be sponging off a lesbian wife, a cohabitating boyfriend, and the government simultaneously. Why are they all on welfare? Why are we assuming that all these lesbians are poor? But anyway, this is a great system that he's set up in his mind in this dystopic future. And by the way, lest you believe that he's against all gay people, no, he's just against the lesbians who are going to economically enslave men. He's actually principally worried about gay men. He says that gay men, in most cases, these men will become unconsenting fathers by reproductive entrapment because the devious class 1 lesbians will trick them into having sex with them. I'm sorry, I don't entirely understand the logic there. I understand that the lesbians, in his theory, could lie to straight men about being straight, sleep with them, lie about their birth control, and get impregnated. But how exactly are they convincing the gay men to have sex with them? The gay men don't want to have sex with women, whether they're lesbians or straight. Maybe he hasn't looked into lesbianism and homosexuality enough to understand that, but it seems a bit ridiculous to me. And so finally, if this happens, if same-sex marriage is legalized and lesbians begin enslaving men, men will be forced to labor for the economic benefit of marriages between women. Marriages men have been redlined out of. These poor men. They don't get to marry lesbians who aren't attracted to them. By the choice of two women who married with intention to have children by men outside the marriage. This approaches the definition of slavery and perhaps sexual trafficking or bondage. Now maybe, look, I'm sure that I've got some liberal viewers, I've got some conservative viewers. If this argument is persuasive to you, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you are worried, it's not that I feel uncomfortable about lesbians getting married, it's that they will economically enslave men. Maybe that's the wave of the future for stopping same-sex marriage. I find that hard to believe. This logic is incredibly tortured. Like, first of all, these lesbians don't want to have sex with men. We know that. It's very easy to get semen donations from a number of clinics around the country. We know that. And I have a feeling that if this becomes some widespread epidemic, that these lesbians are economically enslaving men, at some point, wouldn't the courts step in to protect the men? Like, the courts can respond to things that happen. You can have same-sex marriage be legalized and not allow them to lie to men about birth control. So men, I think that you're going to be okay. I wouldn't worry about it. But to move on, just to give you an idea of the fact that it's not just economic slavery that he's worried about, he says, schools will be aggressively promoting lifestyles that kill or disable children and infect innocent women and babies with HIV. Because we're living in the 80s and only gay people can get HIV. no, that's ridiculous. David R. Usher, I apologize. I like that you put all this work into this argument, and that might make for a pretty cool sci-fi movie in the future at some point, but I don't think that that's going to convince people to oppose same-sex marriage. As I've said many times, and will say many times in the future, the country is changing. We're seeing progress on this issue, not on other ones, unfortunately, but on this issue, and people just don't hate gay people the same way they used to and the same way that you wish that they would. Sorry. So that is all the news for today. Again, I wanted to, especially with my last program, I wanted to keep it a little bit on the light side. I mean, they're incredibly serious stories, but the NSA, like Syria, we've talked it to death. But anyway, so these are the news stories for the day. We do have a bit of community interaction, so stay tuned for just a second. I just need a Marco Rubio, but we do have the Twitter roundup, so I'm going to turn to that. Once again, I'd like to respond to your Twitter and Facebook comments. You guys have left questions for me, and who would I be as a host to not respond to them? And so it is time for the weekly Twitter roundup. First, coming in from Keith Saunders, just wondering what exactly is going on with the Common Room. Haven't seen any new episodes in a while. Keep up the good work. That's a very good question. It does pop up every once in a while in videos on TYTU, and I do answer it there, but I want to answer it again because I want you guys to understand what's going on. The Common Room is on a hiatus right now. We will be bringing it back. Things have just been very busy with the current TV show shutting down, us switching to a new studio and all of that. I've been very busy, and I know that it probably doesn't look that way since we're eating cookies and drinking beer on it, but the Common Room is a very time-intensive program to put on. The editing takes forever, and so I've just needed a break from it, but it will be coming back. I don't know if it'll be coming back next week or next month, but it will be coming back, no worries. Next, coming from Nicholas Hardesty, talk about Titanfall. I am so pumped about that game now. I do want to talk about Titanfall. I thought about making a full video about it, but since I haven't actually played it yet, I want to wait until I get my hands on it. I was really hoping to play it at PAX, but now it looks like I'm not going to be going to PAX, unfortunately. But Titanfall is one of the games that I'm most excited about for the next console cycle. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to be coming out on PS4, but if you're going to get an Xbox One or play it on PC, I think it's going to be great on either of those. Maybe I'm just accepting the hype, particularly from IGN, but everything that I see about this is making me so excited. Now, first of all, some people are mad that it's multiplayer only. I personally think that that's fine. I'm both a Call of Duty and Battlefield player, and honestly, the single player is never very good anyway, and I would rather that they put all that time and resources into making the multiplayer as good as possible, because that's what we're going to be playing the most of. And it's not like there's no precedent for this, like Unreal Tournament, the Quake games later on, Quake Arena and things like that. I think that for the most part, when it comes, even Halo, like Blacklight Retribution, so many of them are really, at the end of the day, only about the multiplayer anyway, and so I think that's fine. I wish that, like I said, it was coming out for the PS4. That would be awesome, but unfortunately it's not the case. If you've seen anything about the epilogue system, where at the end of each match, you then go into this sort of semi-scripted thing where one side is trying to escape and the other side is trying to kill them, that's really cool. I love that they're breaking, thinking outside the box of what we normally expect from multiplayer match-based sort of things. That's cool. The graphics look good, but it looks very similar to like Battlefield 3 or something like that. I'm not expecting too much. Thankfully, since the Xbox 360 and the PS3 are so old, we're seeing a leap in quality there, but you can really only expect so much. One thing that I like about it is, it kind of reminds me a lot about one of the shooters I'm playing right now, which is Blacklight Retribution, where you have the infantry and you have the hard suits. It seems kind of similar to that, and I love that. Like, I like that you have all of these people running around and one or two in mech suits. I think that works pretty well. I don't like the balance between those things in Battlefield as much, because I often feel like the tanks and the planes and helicopters just swamp the rest of the gameplay, and so I'm hoping that they can strike a good balance there. And also, I've read about this. I didn't see it in the previews that have been going on recently, but they said there's going to be a lot of like basically NPCs, like computer-controlled players, and the goal there is that it allows you to get a lot more kills without constantly being mowed down. I haven't seen that done in a lot of games, but it could be good. So just the focus on mobility, the graphics look great. I'm hoping for some interesting modes. I think that the Titans are interesting. It looks great. I'm excited. More info could come out that make me scared about it, and I haven't yet decided if I'm going to be playing it on PC, on Xbox One. It really depends on where my friends go, but I'm super excited about it and expect future videos about it. Now next, Elaine Habamana, Ben Affleck being Batman. Your take on it. You could discuss it. I can discuss it, and I will discuss it. Now, I will produce the caveat first. I do tend to like the Batman movies, but I would not say that I'm a Batman fan through and through. I didn't really love Christian Bale as Batman. I thought that he was a good Bruce Wayne, but when it came to Batman, like, the fighting was fine, but obviously, as with everyone else, I hated the whole voice thing, the growling. And also, we have to bear in mind that this is also a Superman movie, and so it's probably going to suck no matter what, because those tend to. Ben Affleck's fine. He's made a lot of good movies recently. It's not impossible that once you get him in the suit, he could be pretty much like all the other Batmans. And so I'm leaning towards it's probably not a good casting choice. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. It's Batman. I mean, how good could those movies be anyway? Like, we had the reboot. It was great. I don't expect much in the next few years after that. My preference, honestly, is to not cast Ben Affleck. Michael Fassbender would be good. Don't cast anybody. Give it 10 years, reboot after a while. We don't need constant reboots, like with Spider-Man, with the Hulk. Like, give it a couple years off. We can find other movies to watch and be just fine. And so at the end of the day, maybe he'll be good. Like, everybody likes to say, Heath Ledger was derided when that casting decision came out, and that ended up being great. So maybe Ben can surprise us. Finally, Eric Yu says, question, on your weekend shows, who is there besides you to help you with your insert witty show name here? Keep it up. Yeah, and like I said, that title is not going to be there forever. I just haven't gotten around to changing it. Thank you for the keep it up. I will try to. So the easy answer is, for the vast majority of the time, absolutely nobody is here to help me out. Thankfully, this show is set up in a way that I don't need an active director. I do most of the directing in post by adding graphics and things like that. And so for 95% of the time, there is nobody here to help with graphics, with editing, with directing, with setting up, anything like that. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that. Every once in a while, Mark Register will be in the studio and he will help me set up the shot, because it's hard to focus and all that when you don't have a person actually sitting in the chair. And so he has helped me with that. But for the most part, it's just me. And honestly, that's the way it's got to be, because this is not a TYT Network show. I know that the distinction is hard to track sometimes because that's very inside baseball. But this show is not actually on the TYT Network. This is just a personal show that I shoot in the TYT studio with TYT equipment. And so long as I'm not using company resources in terms of people's time and stuff like that, it's very easy to continue to do that. And so who knows, maybe at some point in the future it will be a TYT Network show, in which case I hope to get help. But for now, it's just me. So those are the questions for this week. If you have questions you'd like me to answer in the future, keep them rolling in. You can tweet me at John Iadarola. You can put them in the comments of this video. I always look forward to hearing from you guys. And that's also the end of the show. Week 17 coming to a close. As I said in the intro, this is probably the last time we're going to be shooting in this studio. I should have had champagne on the program. I expect that the next studio will have all of the capabilities of this one, if not better. And so I hope that I can shoot more videos for you guys. Like, I tend to get out 1, maybe 2 per day. But there's a lot more news than that. And I hope to have the time and the resources to put more work into it, cover more stories for you guys. And so as always, if you have things you'd like to see covered, and not just particular stories, I mean, if you think, you know, I like that one tech story you did, or that one movie story, do more of those. I like knowing what sorts of stories you guys want me to cover too. That's always helpful. And so week 17 drawing to a close. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next week.